Welcome to the Traumadelic podcast. My name is Omar Farouk Chauhan, and I created Traumadelic Therapy to provide free mental health resources for viewers to learn more about mental health in the form of psychoeducation. In this podcast, you'll hear from licensed therapists who specialize in trauma-informed care as they break down how trauma is stored in the body. Please note, this is not meant to be taken as medical advice. Traumadelic therapy is not a substitution for psychiatric/mental health services or medication. If you are currently experiencing a psychiatric emergency and/or crisis, please dial 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline or 911 in case of a medical emergency. Thank you for tuning into today's episode and enjoy the podcast. We are recording. We are live. How's it going, everybody? My name is Omar.
I'm Becca.
And we are a licensed therapist specializing in trauma-informed care, revisiting our course material to bring in new ways that we can make our content in a more digestible format for you guys through a podcast form. This is the Traumadelic podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And today we'll be talking a little bit about dissociation, your sense of self as it relates to dissociation, undergoing a fight or flight response, and much more. But before we go into all that, we promised you guys a Q&A section last time, and we don't have a lot of questions to do this separately, so we figured we'll answer the few questions we have in the front end of this podcast. And if you have any more questions, feel free to DM us at Traumadelic Therapy on Instagram or TikTok. But yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything, Becca?
No, yeah, that sounds good. I think we go. Yep.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Talking about dissociation. Anyways, so the first question we got was actually a friend of the podcast. I'm not going to say anybody's name to protect confidentiality, but they wrote, "I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on disorganized attachment style and the transition into secure attachment, and how do we become quote unquote secure? Much love." What are your thoughts on all that?
Initially, I think I hope that everybody knows what attachment styles are.
Yeah. Do you want to? So they were actually asking about our thoughts on disorganized attachment. So I don't know if you want to just jump into that.
Attachment styles are usually formed within the first 3 years of life. It usually comes about because of the caregiving that you receive. Depending on what kind of caregiving you receive, you could form a secure attachment style, which is your caregiver leaves, you're okay, everything's all right. You could have an anxious attachment style. We see that in adulthood with people who are like, "Are you mad at me? Mm-hmm. Is everything okay?"
Yeah.
There's an avoidant attachment style, which just kind of, like it says, avoids.
Yeah, avoids conflict, maybe more independently driven within the relationship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then disorganized.
Disorganized is kind of like a little bit of both, of avoidant, anxious, maybe even secure sometimes. There's not much of a rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah. Right. It's just kind of what it says. It's just kind of all over the place. Right. Yeah.
Did we say secure attachment at all?
Yeah, I said secure. Yeah. And then I think there's one that does anxious, avoidant together.
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, clearly I think when we talk about anything in the mental health field or anything outside in general, like everyday life stuff, there's a spectrum to everything.
Yeah.
Right. So things are very rarely black and white as it says in plain text. Right.
Yeah.
And also, I think some fluidity and some, I guess, flexibility is required to really understand what attachment styles really mean, I guess, because not everything is concrete within the laws of how you are raised and what your relationship is like with your caregiver.
Right.
Meaning you could have had the most secure caregiving in the first 3 years. Who knows what you go through later on in your life that kind of make you hang on one second. Okay. They kind of impose your judgment on how you feel about yourself, and maybe you get distracted or get led towards more of a anxious attachment style.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things that go into this. I think we'll probably have another lecture or another podcast episode where we actually go into what plays into how you perceive your sense of self and your other relationships within the scope of attachment styles.
Yeah, I think that's true.
We're going to talk about caregiving in another episode, and so we'll go deeper into that. But I guess
that's like a brief overview.
Yeah.
That's what the research says, is that it's from 0 to 3. It's from your caregiver, but then in all
life
things,
is messy.
it depends.
Right. So this viewer was asking about disorganized attachment, right? And like I guess they were asking in the context of what we talk about, which is trauma. What are our thoughts about disorganized attachment in relation to trauma? I don't know if you want to take that or.
Yeah, because I remember my initial response to you was like, well, the research says that attachment styles are like once you form that, that's that.
Right.
Like they kind of have like a doom and gloom view
Yeah,
on
yeah,
attachment styles.
yeah.
And then you were
Attachment theory in general.
Yeah,
like a little bit, right?
you're right. And then you challenged me and you were like, yeah, but like if that were the case.
Yeah, because I feel like, and I'll disclose a little bit, right? I feel like different relationships almost bring out different attachment styles for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And on top of that, like seeing how my attachment styles have shifted and changed throughout my years, especially as there's a correlation between like how secure my attachment styles became along with how much I was starting to heal my traumas and address like what was going on in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's the second half of the viewers' questions about like how do we become more secure. I believe that's what they said. Let me double check. Yeah.
So I wonder if it's like almost like because you have a certain attachment style, whatever, we'll assume that research is correct, that you tend to react to things in a certain way. And I wonder if it's like a trigger, like you're being triggered. So then you like go to that. I don't know.
So, I mean, I think it's safe to say that like, depending on your quality of caregiving and the consistency of caregiving you received in the first 3 years of your life, right? Like, for example, say that your caregiver was nurturing and secure, always there for you, always allowing of the feelings that you needed to express, while also just being a resilient source for you to reference when you are undergoing that stress again, for you to remember, oh, okay, my caregiver helped me through this. I can possibly like go through this again and I'll be okay because my reference point was okay, right? Then like you can ideally theoretically grow up to have that secure sense of self, and you can kind of model your behavior after like what you were nurtured after.
Yeah.
However, when you start going into that gray area of inconsistent caregiving and who was really there for you and how often were they there for you and
how did they respond?
Were they really allowing you of feeling your emotions? Then if the answer is inconsistent, or if the answer is like, oh, not so much, then yeah, like your body will remember that. Your body will remember at like 15 years of age when your partner decides to leave you on red for something, right?
When you obsessively check the Snapchat scores,
right?
I've
right,
heard of
and
that
then
too.
like if that's what's if you start to become triggered after that, and if you notice that, there might be like a history, whether it's in the first 3 years of your life or throughout your life, right? That could also like build up quite a bit of like a sense of anxiety, I guess. And it can reflect on what's familiar to you, right? Like your body might be familiar to a sense of abandonment in the first few years of your life. And because you don't really quite remember those years, the moment you experience that, it feels like it's the first time it's happening, but your body is almost like very familiar with that feeling. And that's why it's so alarming. It's like, oh, this happened before. It cannot happen again.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to protect ourselves.
Gets triggered.
Yeah.
So there's a lot
maybe.
There's a lot of information there, a lot. And I think that I don't know if we can do this question much justice without going deep into attachment theory.
Yeah.
So I think
that what you were saying was right, that like eventually the more you start to heal, maybe the less the attachment styles, like maladaptive parts will come out, like
absolutely.
Once you start to heal and you start to feel more secure and you feel safe in your environment, like you probably won't notice the attachment style as much. Not to say that you won't ever, but
100%. I agree. I think that like in a concrete, like if you wanted a concrete step by step, which is honestly like difficult because everyone's healing journey is so different and unique to their own experiences. But if you wanted to like a hypothetical concrete way to like become more secure, right? It's like find what helps you heal, find what helps you like feel more like of a sense of belongingness, find the safe space and the safe people that allow you to be as you are. And as you're in those environments, like, by the way, this isn't therapeutic advice. Oh, we already have that intro. I forgot. It's cool. While you'll find that over time that like all of your internal knots within your emotional health and your stressors will slowly start working themselves out.
Yep.
And I guess I'm referencing my own experience. Like as I put in that work, I found that being more secure with my partner, with my friends, has just been a byproduct of being able to just breathe and just be comfortable in my body.
Yeah.
So I think it's totally possible to become more secure. It's going to take some time. It takes some work, and it takes a lot of self-compassion.
Yeah, because they say that there's neuroplasticity, and honestly, we wouldn't be in this field if it wasn't possible, you know?
Absolutely.
We have to operate on the concept that people are able to change,
100%.
and people are able to grow, and
100%.
people are able to get rid of some of these things, or at least tamper them down.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that question. That was awesome. We have a question about another friend of the podcast. It's they said, I can cite over half of the entire series of SpongeBob. Is this a trauma response? Possibly. No, I don't want anyone to think that if they can do that, they have trauma, right? There's so many things. But like, who knows? Maybe, right? Like,
but if we applied a trauma theory to it, not saying that this
is a fun question, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is
I love.
We're just messing around with this one.
Yeah, I'm not saying that this is, but if we applied the knowledge that we have, maybe.
How do you think it could be a trauma response?
I went like straight to like hyperfixation, like ADHD, like I don't, or maybe it was like their safe place, you know,
yes,
like SpongeBob was their safe thing,
right?
And so they just became so engulfed in SpongeBob that they like shut out the rest. Like maybe it's a dissociative response.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. Like, for example, like it's kind of like how, you know, Gen Z, like we're Gen Z, right? And how we resort to memes a lot. And you're a millennial?
Yeah.
Get out of here. You're not allowed in this room anymore. No, that's crazy. No, I think we're like right on the edge.
Yeah.
I'm like this close to being a millennial, but I was just born right after.
What's the cusp?
I don't know.
Okay, anyways, I digress.
But like regardless, millennial meme culture and Gen Z meme culture is like to reference memes during times of like maybe even stress or avoidance or just distress altogether, as a way to use comedy and humor as a distraction or as a way to cope, right? So maybe like in that sense, like I know I do that, right?
Okay,
like I say a lot of SpongeBob quotes. So in a fun way, possibly, but please, to any other viewer, we know this viewer personally. It's a friend of a podcast, so we know what they're talking about. But like to any other viewer, that does not mean you are dealing with a lot of trauma. Consult your mental health provider.
Just fun to put a trauma lens on it.
Absolutely. But they did ask a serious question right after about tips on how to stop personalizing everyone, or I guess personalizing everything potentially, right? I'm interpreting that as like, how do I stop taking everything personally, right? Or everyone personally, maybe. And if I got that wrong, I'm sorry. Send your question again, and we'll totally answer it correctly next time. But if that's how we're reframing it, what would you say?
I think I said something about like, well, as you like heal and grow, like some of those things will kind of tamper down, because I think that sometimes whenever you take things like offensively and stuff like that, I feel like you're almost being triggered, you know? It's like your body's way of reminding you that something happened before and it really sucked and we're not doing that again. So it's like, hey, get offended, get mad, because mad will get things done.
Right.
I mean, that's what I think of. I don't know if that's true.
I was going to say like literally along the same lines that if you're in a situation where you're taking everything, like if you're personalizing a lot of the things around you, right? If you're making it about you, like, this is because I'm a horrible person, or they did this because I deserve this, or, you know, they do something that has nothing to do with you and you relate it like, oh, this is a consequence of my actions.
Yeah.
This is a byproduct of an internal sense of instability or maybe like fight or flight response, right? Like a stress response, right?
Yeah.
You know, you don't just stop personalizing everything or everyone, right? Your body's ability to stop doing this is going to be a byproduct of healing.
Yeah.
Right. So because because this maladaptive response is a byproduct of maybe like a lack of homeostasis internally, then the byproduct would go away as long as you address what's inside. So I mean, I think like, again, we're not your mental health provider, but the basic insight would be to just, you know, when you find yourself doing it, be aware that you're doing it and find ways to regulate and de-escalate what's going on internally, and just watch what you're doing without judgment.
Yeah.
Right? Like, don't try to stop it, because the more you try to suppress it, you're just addressing the symptom without addressing what's really going on. And what's really going on is a sense of dysregulation.
Yeah. And I think that bringing your own personal awareness to it will surprisingly show you kind of why you're taking things of like personal comes from, because is it because you're irritable, and sometimes irritability can be depression? Is it a trauma response? Is it this? Is it that?
It's almost like it happens habitually, like the trauma response. And the psychiatrist I was mentioning to you about earlier, Becca, before we started our podcast, he has a background in like Buddhist practices, right? And he was talking a little bit about, and like don't massacre me if I get this wrong. I don't have a Buddhist background, but this is what I'm hearing from someone who claimed to be a monk in their previous time in their life. He was talking about how like monks are able to break their habits or break bad practices. Like maybe like your instinctual habit is to personalize things, right? Not by forcing them to stop, but becoming hyper aware of them, right? Because habits. Ooh. Why did my camera die? That's interesting. Okay, I guess we're going to record the podcast without a video right now because I don't know what happened there. Or, yeah, let's forget about video for today because the camera, I have no idea what happened there. It's going to be too hard to sync this up. Anyways.
True.
Because we already got started. As I was saying, habits are coming out of like an unconscious response, right? They're coming out of like a system that you're not really aware of. They're almost autonomic, right? Like if you have a habit of biting your nails, you don't think about it, you just start doing it, right?
Yeah.
So the way you can't use your prefrontal cortex or your decision-making brain to just stomp that because it's going to come back up in a different way, right? Whether you suppress this symptom and it'll come back a different way, right? Or it'll just come back as it is in another scenario. So what you do is just like you bring the awareness back to the surface, right? Like you almost kind of give into it without giving into it habitually. You give into it like cognitively, like you just watch it. You're aware, all right, I'm doing this. If you're addicted to your phone, okay, I see that I'm doing this right now. And that over time can be in and of itself enough to help you kind of intervene the next time you do it. Like, no, you know what? I'm not going to do this time.
Right.
Now, that could be a little ableist, right? That could be ableist in the sense like, especially if you don't have a lot of complex trauma, like it might be easier to do that than someone who has a lot of complex trauma. But that's something I think it's an interesting practice to maybe experiment with for a little while you're still regulating.
But I also think that we use concepts like that in trauma processing.
Right,
like
right.
Watch it.
Just watch it. Yeah, just watch it happen.
Watch it. Or like whenever I get stuck, like okay, allow your brain to be as whatever,
Right,
like,
absolutely.
You just kind of watch it, and you get to choose whenever you allow some of these things because it pulls it out of that lizard brain part, like the automatic
100%.
function to more of like, okay, now your brain is in control of it.
Yep. You can almost watch it, right, and allow it to do what it wants to do internally. And once you become aware of the emotional distress or the emotional response internally, you have a much better chance at not letting it dictate what you're going to do with it with your physical actions. Like, for example, if I see you looking at me some type of way and I start personalizing that, like, oh, I did something, and I start bombarding you at 3 a.m. Why did you look at me this way? Did I do something wrong? Blah, blah, blah. Like, instead of doing something that's a maladaptive, destructive behavior potentially in that scenario, I just watch it and tolerate that emotion and let it pass.
Oh, I so want to take this in the form of trauma because like if you like your example, like I saw you look at me in a certain way and I was thinking that you were like mad at me. That's trauma too.
Right,
like,
exactly.
We could go that direction, and it's like picking up on those little cues because you're so hyper vigilant all the time, and you have to like. Yeah,
if you're interested in that concept, we did go into that discussion last episode, so please check out episode 3. We talked about the polyvagal theory, and what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of a focus on the polyvagal theory. We do have one more question, and it's not trauma related, but we appreciate. Actually, no, we have 2 more. This one, right there, another viewer, I guess. Thank you for tuning in. They asked about dreams that feel so real you felt you already did / told, etc. things. Trauma? Question mark.
So I assume I'm thinking like you have a dream of you filling the cat dish and then you wake up in the morning and the cat dish isn't filled, but you're like, why isn't it filled? I already did that.
That's how we're interpreting the question. So again, if we got that wrong, please hit up the show again and we'll revise our answer.
Yeah. Is it? We had a long discussion about this. Is it trauma? And I was like, well,
I mean, I think more information is required, right?
Yeah.
Because how many times have we had a dream where we thought we did something already when we just did it in our dream,
right?
Not in real life, right?
But I think that we were saying that if you have like deep dreams like that, it's something about like your REM sleep is so deep that it's
it's really active.
Yeah.
You have a lot of blood flow. I think you were talking about in a part of your brain that receives like visual information, and then you have a lot of blood flow and possibly the part of your brain that's feeling emotional, like you know, regulation or processing. And I mean, that's what REM sleep is for, is to like kind of help clean out what you're holding on to internally. Well, that's what's theorized rather. So, I mean, I wonder what that says, right? Like, if it's really often, like, what kind of dreams are they? Are they, like, stressful? Like, because we do realize that dreams are possibly your mind's way of, like, filtering out or working through what's going on internally.
Yeah, so if this is, like, is it a dream about stress, or is it, like, a dream about everyday things?
Yeah.
And if
what are you working through in these dreams?
If it is dreams about everyday things and you're, like, having this type of a connection to it, what does that say?
Right.
But then what if it's, like, you're waking up from the dream and you still feel like you're in a dream, because that's trauma.
Yeah.
So I guess the answer that we've come up with is like, well, it depends.
Yeah.
But that's our answer for everything.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if you would like to DM us some more information about what you had in mind with this question, please feel free to do so. And we can address this question better if you are willing to provide some more information. Thank you again for tuning in. The final question was not very much related to the topics of the podcast, but more so another friend of the podcast just asking us in general, how long have we been thinking about before we started the podcast, before finally going for it or finally doing it. And I mean, I think for us, we talk about this quite often. Like, I mean, I normally, I don't know if we were really like thinking about it for a while. It was more of like, let's do it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'm not remembering it correctly.
I guess what I remember, it doesn't mean that it was actual fact, but whenever we were getting towards like the end of our program and we were like all three of us, Santana,
one of our good friends, she's a social worker as well.
We were like sad, obviously, about the program ending, and it was like, oh man, I just like want to keep learning and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like, and Omer was like, we should go through the lectures again because I have them. I was like, that would be so cool. You know what we should do is we should make a podcast of all the stuff that we listen to.
And I was like, that's a great idea.
You're like, yeah, we should. And then we parted ways. And then it was, I think I like texted and I was like, so do we want to do that podcast?
Yeah,
do you want to share those lectures? And then
I think that's such a good idea, right? Because like the original intent was like, we just want to revisit our material, so we know we're keeping up to date, like we're refreshing our mind about the work that we're specializing in.
Yeah.
And like us coming together to have a discussion is a great way to like for us to debrief ourselves. But then like, oh, if we can turn this into a digestible format, I already like making mental health content. This just kind of perfectly fell in line. So
it worked out because like we went through that program and it was fast paced.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just how it has to be. It has to be fast paced. I felt like we kept up, but it was like, I really want to revisit some of these concepts so that I can really understand.
Yeah.
And I want to know how I can deliver these concepts to my clients.
Absolutely.
In practice. And it was like, why don't we make a podcast?
Yeah. 100%. So like, I think everything kind of fell all together while we had the desire to like deliver this information, not only just to each other, but also to the world. So
yeah,
it's like a really cool half planned, half spontaneous endeavor.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, without further ado, we're about 25 minutes into the podcast, and I think we can probably start getting into the topic for the day, which is, again, about dissociation. I do think it might be worthwhile to just briefly revisit and re-summarize what we talked about last week. The last session about the polyvagal theory and what we'll be focusing on within this topic and how dissociation relates to that. So
that's a good idea.
Polyvagal theory, if you don't remember, it's a theory that describes your 3 states of being when you're undergoing a stress response or when you're not in a stress response. This is like very simplistic layman's terms if you want to revisit that podcast, please check out episode 3.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, your regulated state when you're around 60 to 80 beats per minute heart rate, when you're like kind of grounded and present, you're in this state called the ventral vagal system
Complex.
or complex.
Remember we had this argument, well, not argument, but discussion.
Yes, ventral vagal complex. Yep. So like this is where you feel probably calm, right? Let's say a stressor comes into play and you start entering into the sympathetic nervous system response. This is where you go into fight or flight. This is anywhere between 100 and 150 BPM. And let's say that this stressor becomes so traumatic and so destabilizing, and to the point where it's pinning you down, you're not able to escape. Your heart rate can't keep rising without it really having a heart attack. So what your body then does, your heart rate's shooting up, it's getting more and more stressed out. Your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of your fight or flight response, forces its way to lower your heart rate down to 20 to 50 beats per minute, not so you can stay calm while you're being traumatized or you're undergoing the traumatic experience, but so you can like black out, basically.
Yeah, it comes in, shuts you down.
Yeah. This is where, you might have blood flow going to the hindbrain and really just like stimulating your immune response and really like undergoing a lot of blood clot in case you are being like stabbed, for example, if that's what the traumatic response is. This is what we call the dorsal vagal complex. The dorsal vagal complex is kind of that blacked out response or blacked out state you go into during that traumatic experience, right? And what we find is that people with a lot of trauma, with a lot of complex trauma, are probably going to be more quick to enter the dorsal vagal complex, maybe even skip the fight or flight response and just go straight to blacking out if that's what worked for their bodies. And there is a little bit of not even a little bit, there's a relationship or a correlation between this state and what comes out of PTSD, which is dissociation. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, and how dissociation plays a role within trauma and within the state of being.
So if the dorsal vagal complex comes like on and your body is like shutting you down, that during that time is when you're going to experience dissociation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite possibly.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, you told me we should probably asterisk this one, but
yeah,
that the DSM, okay, 5, but then they had text revisions. I don't know if it was in the TR or if it was just in the 5. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That they just added, like, is it dissociations as a category?
As a, yes, I believe as a category or a symptom under PTSD.
Oh, okay.
I believe that it wasn't in the DSM-4 and versions prior. I put an asterisk there because I'm not sure. So if, just confirm that if you want to. But dissociation is a more recent addition within the DSM for PTSD.
But it is definitely worth noting that the DSM has a lot of dissociation disorders that you could put, and none of the stuff that we're talking about today is going to be with DID or dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Today, what we'll be talking about when we talk about dissociation is going to be strictly within the connotation of trauma. If what we're describing fits in line with what you might be relating to and what you might be going through, there is a good chance that there is trauma as a reason behind why this dissociation is occurring.
Yeah, it like everything that we talk about, it depends, because there are times that you can just willfully dissociate. Sure, that it's part of being a human, but this type of dissociation is kind of like you can't really control it.
Yeah. I would say that those times where you're like willfully dissociating, the more appropriate term would just be like, oh, you're zoning out, I guess, right?
Yeah, like daydreaming.
Yeah, maybe
or whatever.
you've taken a drive to your commute to work has been so repetitive, like your brain kind of just knows how to automatically take over.
Yeah.
Right. But in what we're talking about, dissociation is actually something that's very different. It's something that comes online, or like it's a response that comes online rather, when your body is sensing some form of threat and it knows that dissociation is a way that it can check out and not feel the pain.
Yeah, so like if somebody were to like be in a threat and the dorsal vagal comes on, which is that one that kind of like shuts your body down in a really traumatic situation and you're starting to dissociate, like some of the things that you might notice, maybe even like after that event or maybe even while it's going, I don't know, you'd start to notice like feeling numb or like detached from your emotions, maybe some like you'd feel like you're a cold person, not like temperature, but you know what I mean. Tunnel vision, time may slow down. Sounds, this one was weird to me, maybe muffled, like you couldn't hear high pitched or low pitched, you're like just mostly in like a certain frequency.
I remember reviewing the notes, like our professor was talking about how like when you are entering that dorsal vagal complex during a traumatic response, like your ears almost like apparently they change like formation. Like I am nowhere near like an expert in how ears work to be able to eloquently describe this, but basically in order to protect you from loud noises, it is more, I guess it kind of just blocks out higher frequencies, and you're more able to understand lower frequencies rather than high pitched ones. So for example, you're near an explosion, and to protect your ears so you don't get some like hearing damage, your ears kind of change their orientation. I don't know how that works. I don't have the research to back that up, but I'm sure that there's something out there. So if anybody wants to verify that for us, feel free to DM us.
I know, I just like have that, and I'm like, I just know it's a protective thing. It's a protective factor.
But you know, it makes sense though, because when you are dissociating, right? Like I can relate that deeper voices are probably going to be easier for me to comprehend because things do get muffled. You do kind of like just zone out of reality. And especially if someone's yelling at you or really in your face, or there's a lot of loud sounds going on, you're almost just not there.
I would imagine it's probably because like whenever you're shutting down, blood is like drawing away from things that it doesn't need to expend to. And I bet like the area that of your brain that like processes all that stuff doesn't really have very good blood flow at that time.
And that does go back to what we said in episode 1, like your Broca's area and your Wernicke's area, right? Like you're losing blood in both the parts that are able to articulate and interpret speech.
Yep, exactly. So I'd imagine that has to do with it. One thing that is a symptom is like not remembering things, and I've heard that commonly. You know, it'll be like, oh, I don't remember my whole childhood. That I'm not saying that it's because of trauma. Like we can't say definitively.
It is a red flag though.
It is a red flag if you tell me that you don't remember your whole childhood, because if I were to use a trauma lens, it would be like your brain is like protecting you. Like you can't remember these things because if this memory comes up, like even if it would be good, because we talked about that too, like even if the memory was good, trauma sometimes taints those and they feel in your body bad.
100%. And so like say that you had like 100 experiences, different moments that are worth remembering between ages 5 and 10, right? Just hypothetically speaking, right? And about 20 of those were very dark and very traumatic, and about 80 of those were happy, right? If those 20 dark memories were traumatic enough for you to dissociate, right? Like you'll probably block out a lot of your happy moments between 5 and 10, right? Because it is painful. Well, one, it might be painful being present because of your traumas that you're going through. You're going to dissociate. And on the other hand, it could just be that like when you look back at those memories, like your body, like you were mentioning, your body doesn't know how to differentiate bad from good, right? Emotions, right? So when you remember a good memory, and this is especially if you haven't processed the bad emotions that are stuck from the bad memories, right? Your body will like, oh yeah, I remember that memory, but also do you remember that bad memory? Because I'm holding on to that too, right? And it almost kind of like takes the color away from those good times. It almost feels like there was never a good time because the trauma is so like consuming of the entire timeline of your life. It's very heartbreaking, which also is empowering or hopeful for me, because I think that means there is hope, right? That means that, you know, what's the only thing that's stopping you, well, not to simplify or glorify, but the only thing that's stopping you from feeling those good emotions, there is something in the way. There is trauma. So if we can find a way to unlodge that, let it really be processed in your body, you can theoretically, ideally, hopefully get back in touch with the happier times, or create some more happy times or joyful moments that are worth living for.
I think that like as you heal and you process that trauma internally, then your brain starts to release some of those locked up memories and is
Yes.
like, here they are. And sometimes they can be painful, but if you're in a place where you're starting to heal and your brain brings that up,
Yeah.
hopefully you're in a place where you're able to process that one. But as it
Absolutely.
releases some of those like really hard to deal with memories, it also will release some of those really fun, beautiful memories.
Yeah.
And as you process out the bad or the hard things to process and you start feeling some of those things, the
Yeah.
caveat, which is really good, is that you start to feel all the
Yeah.
really good things.
100%.
It's amazing whenever you haven't been feeling for so long and you start to work through this and you start to heal, you
Yeah.
start to have that like first like feeling of like true like love
This is
or
who I am. This is
appreciation.
your sense of
Yes,
self.
yeah,
True breakthroughs.
it's real magic.
And this is kind of off topic, so we'll probably save this for another day. It is going to be a topic that we think we're going to address later. But like, also note that if you're someone who's on this journey and you're regaining your sense of self and you are starting to process some unprocessed emotions and memories, there's a lot of grief there too, right? Like
Oh, absolutely.
regaining happy or joyful moments, it comes with a lot of grief that
It does.
you recognize, you have more compassion for who you are, but then you also start recognizing it and having more awareness of what you didn't have growing up and what you deserved.
Yeah.
And that can be very harsh and very painful. And that's why with any amount of trauma healing, a good quality social support is necessary. It's crucial.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about, like the grief that comes with it. And because you're starting to feel again, like it starts to feel a little overwhelming at times whenever you're like triggered by something where you're like, oh, I didn't have that and I wish I did.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it can get overwhelming, but it's also like a very beautiful process. So it's both. Both and. So we talked a little bit about dissociation. The DSM has quite a few categories in there, like dissociative amnesia or fugue, depersonalization, derealization disorder, unspecified dissociative disorder, and other specified. I love whenever they do that, unspecified and other specified. Like, great, cool.
All right, so
just
a
give
lot
me
of a lot of big words to unpack there. So what's the first type of dissociation you mentioned?
I think that we should just talk mostly about let's start with depersonalization.
Okay.
Because that one's a fun one.
So depersonalization and derealization they're both very common forms of dissociation that people kind of commonly experience if they are experiencing dissociation, right? So we've already established that dissociation is a response where your brain kind of shuts down or you get a little bit of a brain fog during a stressor or during a stressful environment to kind of like check yourself out and really protect you from feeling the pain of the current moment or whatever moment is reminding you of a previous moment or a past traumatic experience, right?
Right.
So would you like to explain for us what depersonalization is?
Depersonalization is like disconnected from your body. So it's like feeling like you don't belong to yourself or kind of like you're outside looking in or sometimes like you're not in control of like your body or anything, like something like that, where it just doesn't feel like your body belongs to you.
So some people hear that, right? Because like I remember learning about depersonalization, right? And it's almost like you're outside of your body looking at yourself and looking at the experience, right? People have reported under like when they're being, like very horribly abused and they get into this dissociative trance where they feel like they just left their body and they're looking, right? So I wonder, like, I guess I'm asking for your opinion here. Is this the same as an out-of-body experience, or is it same? Is it something different? Like, what would you interpret that as?
I would, it's very common to like out-of-body experience. Like whenever you're being traumatized or like, I'm thinking mostly of sexual abuse because that is very common to just escape the moment by like leaving your body and you're like watching it. You're watching whatever's happening to your body as if like that's not me, that's somebody else. Because if you were to be in that and be mindful and be like, this is my body, that would be horrific and so hard to process. But if you watch it as if it's like, oh, that's not me, it's like,
it's a way of just
great
tuning it out, like kind of really just the psychological torment in that circumstance is already so immense and so daunting, so painful. I can only imagine, right? And then so the only thing left to do is to just snap out. Well, not snap out of
Leave.
it. I mean, like leave your body.
Leave your
Right?
body. Yeah. Your
So
brain like does it for you. They're
yeah,
like, yeah, this is painful. You should leave.
yeah. So depersonalization, think of it as like depersonalization. You're no longer the person that you once were for that moment, right? You're kind of leaving your body almost, looking in. What's the other one? Derealization.
Oh, but we still have more
Oh,
because
okay. Sorry.
this one distorts the view of your body. So we get into
Yeah,
body image stuff
yeah.
too.
So this is a lot of this is like kind of correlation, things that we're connecting when it comes to people who have like a lot of disconnect within their sense of bodies and how depersonalization may be related. Like,
Yeah,
we can't prove,
like
but it could be correlated.
there's definitely a link between depersonalization and disordered eating, but we can't say that like trauma caused that.
Right. Like in a lot of research, you can't say this caused this or
Yeah,
this proves that. There's really more so correlation. So why
right.
don't you
Well, I
explain
mean,
that for us a
if
little bit?
you're like, if it distorts how you view your body, like in a trauma lens, you could look in the mirror and like the trigger is looking at yourself.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
that's hard to escape. So if you've had a lot of like traumatic experiences
Mm-hmm.
around that, then you're looking in the mirror and you're being triggered and you're maybe depersonalizing after you're triggered. So then you're looking at your body and it's distorting,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you're seeing a fat body whenever it's not a fat body, or you're seeing something like that.
Yeah.
And then whenever you're depersonalizing and you're seeing this as your reality when it's not necessarily your reality, you're like, well, I got to change that. And
Yeah.
that is like, oh, I got to restrict my eating, or I
Yeah.
have to do this, I have to do that.
It's creating some anxious behaviors or maladaptive behaviors to address the anxiety that might be related to a trauma,
Yes.
right? That's happening fully internally, right? Like
Yes.
if trauma is stored in the body and there are parts of your body that are still holding on to the pain of an
Mhm.
experience and the pain is so great that you have to disconnect from it, then it's very possible, it's very likely that when you look in the mirror, you don't identify with that part of your body.
Yep.
It doesn't feel like it's yours,
Right.
and therefore might even distort, like you said,
Right.
the way it looks to your eyes.
Yep.
It's very powerful how the brain works to protect you, but also very heartbreaking where trauma can lead if it goes unprocessed for so long.
Right. So I mean, it's not this causes this, but it's
Yeah,
just something to like
yeah.
keep in the back of your
And,
mind.
and this is different from body dysmorphia, but it also could be related. There needs to be a lot more research to really verify the correlation, right? But like, it's hard to imagine the circumstances where people are experiencing an eating disorder or body dysmorphia or some sort of response that creates some sort of self-hatred, right? That isn't related to trauma,
Right. I
right?
know.
Like, because like it has to have come from somewhere. The one thing that we were talking about before the podcast that comes to mind, right, is like how bleach creams are so popular within the South Asian culture, right?
Mhm.
So growing up, I'm Pakistani American, right? And within the South Asian culture, bleach creams are so normalized. And this is because, while we're growing up in a white supremacist, like, I guess, world, right?
Right.
Where Eurocentric and Western values are more than like glorified around the world, right? And Eurocentric beauty standards are the standard, right? They're
Right.
they're the default, right? It can like inadvertently or maybe even like intentionally, depending on who's giving the message out or
Mhm.
sending the message out, it can create a sense of disconnect and even self-hatred with how you look, right?
Right.
So when I experienced a lot of people, with whether they're family members or people that I've known just within my culture who are kind of just obsessed with bleach creams, it's because they cannot stand to look at their skin getting dark, whether it's tan in the summer or just how their skin is beautiful in it as it is by itself, right?
Right.
And like I wonder like, you know if you look at the etiology of that trauma, right? If that because that could just be trauma. Like there
Could
was,
be.
no one like naturally is born and raised to believe that darkness is ugly or South Asian skin tones is ugly and only white people are beautiful. This is taught,
Right.
right? So at what point growing up did the child get informed that they look hideous when their skin starts tanning and start turning dark to the point where they have to anxiously manage these symptoms by applying bleach creams,
Right.
right? This is, you can kind of call it a sense of dysmorphia. You
Yeah.
are looking in the mirror and you're having a distorted view of yourself, right, as it is, and therefore you apply bleach cream. So that was a very interesting to connect it to and relate it to.
Yeah. I wonder too how generational trauma comes into it too,
Absolutely.
because it can be
Absolutely.
passed down.
Especially considering, like, we're not too far removed from, like, generationally speaking, from when the British still had reign over India, right?
Yeah.
Before Pakistan even split off from India, right?
Mhm.
We've had so much toxic, like, ideologies and just trauma overall just come out of, like, British rule and their ideology, while, our ancestors were, like, starting to, like, probably relearn how to live under this type of like lifestyle, under the Western or ideology, or the
Right.
Eurocentric values rather. So I
Right.
think this kind of relates to, I think we talked about this in the first or second podcast about how this is a really good example of how trauma manifests in different ways within different cultures,
Yeah.
right? Like internally what's going on is still like very similar: fight or flight, lack of a sense of self, maybe a lack of homeostasis,
Mhm.
but presenting itself in so many different ways.
Right. This one's fun because there are so many layers too. Like
Yeah.
especially given your example is like we have to think about like generational trauma, we have to think about like even racial trauma that is going on right now,
Yeah.
like racism is trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
Experiencing that can be something that can trigger depersonalization where you're looking at your body and being like
100%.
I don't like what I see, or
Yeah.
what I'm seeing is distorting, and I
Yeah.
have to anxiously change this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So definitely something to
So much more to unpack.
Yeah.
Right? So much more, but
that
I'm sure
one
we can
is
hold a session about that
Yeah.
as a separate topic
that
of an
one's
episode.
broad and fun to dive into. Derealization.
Derealization. So this is like when, again, another dissociative state, but instead of like being out of body, like it's more so your reality doesn't feel real. It almost feels like a movie set or a
Yeah.
TV set.
Yeah.
Maybe there's someone behind that wall with a microphone and camera and lights.
Yeah.
Well, technically, that's what's happening with us right now. We have a camera filming us with big lights, which the camera failed, unfortunately. So no video for this episode, unfortunately. But anyways,
But this one's really common. I've heard so many people
I felt
describe
it,
this to
100%.
me.
I think
Yeah.
like, I guess it's no secret by now, right? To our viewers listening, like I'll disclose, like one of the main reasons why I'm in this field, right, what drew me into trauma is because I have a lot of trauma of my own that I've been
Yep.
working through,
Yeah.
right? And I remember vividly there are so many times where I just felt like, whoa, like I am not real. Something in my environment isn't real,
Yeah.
right? Things feel like a video game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's a lot of kids who think that too. They're like, I feel like
Yeah.
I'm on a TV show.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like, yeah,
And
it's called
important to
derealization.
it's important to differentiate, right? Like there's an imagination side, right,
True,
when kids
true.
experience that, but there's also kids who are experiencing that actual dissociation that aren't doing it because they're being imaginative. They're doing it because they're being disconnected from the reality, from their body, because the reality is so painful. I have a very close friend who, it breaks my heart. He always, whenever we talk about this, he always tells me that, dude, like my entire life felt like that.
Right.
He cannot remember a time in his life where he didn't feel like things weren't a video game. Now he has pockets of being grounded and being present, but as long as he can remember, everything felt like a video game or a movie.
Yeah.
Coming
Yeah.
out of a lot of dysregulation in his family system.
Yeah. And obviously it doesn't come as a shock that this is a protective factor, because if
Yeah.
you were fully grounded and fully aware of your surroundings, your brain is telling you that they're too painful to deal with. So
Yeah.
it's like, hey, why don't we shut this off and I'll create a diversion and we'll pretend like we're on a movie set.
Right, 100%. And it's so heartbreaking how that works, uh, especially like with trauma that goes unhealed and unresolved, because the more we heal and the more we start to find our place, our purpose, we make our own meanings and so on and so forth. A lot of it comes with, and I'm talking anecdotally right now, but a lot of it comes with like a sense of connection to the world,
Right.
to this place that you're sharing an existence with, whether it's your partner, whether you're sharing your existence with a friend, you're sharing this planet, this interpersonal experience, right? And trauma directly comes to contradict that. The
Yeah.
entire act of depersonalization and derealization is it cuts you out of your reality, in and of itself.
Yep.
And it's doing that to keep you safe. It's not the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing could probably happen is you being 100% present during the traumatic experience, and you could have a heart attack, right?
Absolutely.
But it is heartbreaking to fathom, what that must be like 24/7, and you know, trying to break out of it. It's very hard. It's so like instinctual and out of your control when you snap into those.
These like systems are just, they're crazy to me because
So complex.
Yeah, they're so complex, and they like work so well. Like
the
human body is amazing to me.
Yeah.
Like all of these things, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Something important to know about derealization is that it can also look like other mental health diagnoses.
Just like trauma.
God, yeah, I know. Trauma, it seems like everything can look like trauma. ADHD, it could be trauma. ASD, it could be trauma. Depression, anxiety, could be just trauma.
You never know.
But this one could definitely look like psychosis or schizophrenia or something like that, because like if you're going around telling people like I'm on a movie set, it feels like I'm in a movie or something like that, people might think you're psychotic.
This actually goes right back to, we talked about this in the second or first episode, but this goes right back into how dissociation can, like you said, look like psychosis or schizophrenia because of the hallucinations that come out of it, right?
Yes.
The whole reason, remember, your body is dissociating is because it's experiencing a stressor that's taking it back in time that was so stressful that your body needs to check out, right? And what happens with being taken back in time are those flashbacks, are those hallucinations, right? Like they're going to be like maybe hearing the voice of the perpetrator, right? Or maybe some form of like some manifestation of that, right? Some variety of that. Maybe it's going to be seeing something sinister that's correlated to the perpetrator that was involved in your PTSD experience, your trauma experience, right? And that's what we call like apophenia, but we'll get into that in just a second, right? So like it's so common for these people who are dissociating to hear these sinister voices in their head, right? And they go to seek mental support. And like you said, they see it and they're like, oh, psychosis, schizophrenia. Now, that's not to say that all cases are PTSD. Like there's a difference between schizophrenia and PTSD.
For sure.
Right? But how many times has PTSD been misdiagnosed as schizophrenia?
Yeah, I wondered that too once I I started learning this stuff. I was like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
I wonder.
It's insane.
I loved that article, like research article that somebody did that it's not super great, but it was talking about the difference or the overlaps between trauma hallucinations and schizophrenia hallucinations. And they talked about like how in trauma, it's more often that in trauma, the hallucinations or the voices are of somebody that they know or somebody specific. Like, oh, like let's say you had trauma with your mom, and the voice is your mom. Like, you know,
I can 100% verify, right? Again, more disclosure here, that, you know, for the longest time growing up, my internal monologue wasn't my own. Now, I wouldn't relate this to, I don't think it's hallucination, right? Because I'm not.
No, there's a difference between inner monologue, and auditory hallucinations.
This isn't like that PTSD hallucination that we were just referring to, that you're actually hearing an auditory sense of like that voice. However, right, like for the longest time, my internal monologue wasn't my voice. It was the voice of those people who were involved in my traumatic experience, and it would always be very sinister. I could control it, sure. However, its default instinctual like response was to criticize me, was to like yell at me, was to do what the perpetrators within my traumas did to me. Right. That was almost my sense of self.
That you brought up another point that I didn't even mention, was that you're more likely with trauma to be able to control the voices.
Right.
And with schizophrenia, you're less likely to be able to control them.
Right.
So just some, I don't even think it was like maybe it was substantial, but I don't know. Just some things that stood out to me that I was like, that makes a whole lot of sense knowing what I know about trauma.
sorry to cut you off. My
No, you're fine.
apologies. I remember our professor had also mentioned when we were differentiating schizophrenia and PTSD. I feel the need to bring this up in case like a viewer is thinking like, oh, what if I have one or the other, right? Like, first of all, again, seek professional mental health professional advice, right? Not from us. But also, I think it's important to remember. I mean, important to note that schizophrenia, the way it differs itself, right? Like, there seems to be like a common gene. I think that he was
yeah. Oh
talking
my
about.
God. His research on that was so cool because it
Yes.
had just come out.
Yes, there seems to be a common gene within those who are schizophrenic, right? Like a precursor, basically.
It was okay. So like
It's called the C4 gene. I
yeah,
believe.
yeah, because like it in the first however many years of life, you're making all these connections in your brain.
Yeah.
You have so many connections, and that C4 like goes and snips them. You know,
Yes,
like
yes.
prunes the connections because there's
Yeah.
no way you could have that many. But
Right.
the C4, whenever it goes like haywire
Yeah.
and snips too many things,
Yeah.
that was the precursor for
Yep.
schizophrenia.
And a way that kind of manifests is like a very intense sense of isolation and lack of desire for social support
yes.
or social connection. And I don't mean that as in like, oh, people who are traumatized are less likely to seek social support. There's isolation there, but this is like an innate, like instinctual drive to like be separate from humanity.
They have a
right?
hard time like even interacting with others
With people
at
right?
all.
Yeah, and again, this is not within any cultural context. This is not within like the context of the ASD. This is something different, right? So,
Right.
Don't mistake this for something that you might have if this isn't something you might have, right?
It's not just being
Right.
introverted.
Yeah, this is not the same thing. And so that's a precursor to schizophrenia. And also what our professor had mentioned, right? Like when you have hallucinations in the form of schizophrenia, right? You kind of like, it's kind of like a little bit of like a lottery ticket, right? Like you might get a voice or hallucinations that are helpful,
Mhm.
right? And you might get voice or hallucinations that are evil or sinister, right? But with PTSD, right, when you have like those hallucinations that come in the form of flashbacks, sounds, whatever, cognitions, right, they're almost always sinister. They're
Right.
almost always very relevant somehow, some way to the traumatic experience,
Right.
and they're alerting the body, like they're scaring the body into the fight or flight response.
Yeah, because I think I don't know, this is just my opinion, but it feels like the body's always wanting to heal that trauma.
Yeah.
But then it like has systems in place for whenever it's getting too overwhelming to not let the body heal.
Right.
Like it's a delicate balance, and I feel like it's always trying to
Absolutely.
like, hey, pay attention to this. This really hurt us.
Yeah.
Hey, pay attention. But
That leads us to, I mean, we can easily go
rumination.
into rumination and dissociation. I mean, psychic determinism, but I don't know, did we skip anything for dissociation yet? Or
No, I
do we
think
have
we're
everything?
right on track.
Yeah.
Keep
Okay.
going.
So I'll let you take rumination.
Rumination, I
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
that. It's
Yeah.
so fun. Rumination is whenever you just constantly are thinking. Like if you think about something that is stressful that happened in your brain, just continues.
Yeah.
Continues.
It goes like in a cycle almost, right? Like trying to resolve something.
Yes, you're like entertaining it though. This is something that you're still able to control mostly, but your brain is looking for how could I have done that differently? What is the meaning?
Yeah.
What, like it's just continually going through the scenario
Yeah.
because it wants to resolve it in the
Right.
best way that it can.
For those of you who did tune in to our first few episodes where we talked about the different hierarchies within your brain, right? The cognitive brain, the emotional brain, the lizard brain, right? This is rumination in this context, the way we're talking about it in the context of PTSD, is like the act of trying to resolve the stressor or the trauma using your cognitive human brain, right? But that doesn't work because you're not able to go into the body, to the lizard brain, to really just work out emotionally what happened to you.
Right.
So that's why rumination never works. That's why you tire yourself out. That's why you go back and forth. I should have done this. Your body is waiting to reach that aha moment. This is what should have happened. Oh, you finally worked it out, but it never happens.
Yeah, no, it
rumination doesn't allow for that.
Has anybody ever had that happen?
I
Because
don't
if they
think so.
did, like,
And if
let
they
me know
did,
how you
if they
did
did,
it.
I have to question like the validity of that. Like,
Yeah.
did you think you finally worked it out and you
Yeah.
suppressed the emotion so it doesn't come back up,
Right.
or like did it really just not happen? You know what I
I
mean?
wonder if like rumination happens more whenever you're not prone to feeling, like if you have already been traumatized
Sure.
enough where
Yeah.
you can't feel things to process it out.
Yeah.
If you're like, I'll just think about it. I'll think.
Yeah.
I'll think. And it's almost like intellectualizing.
Yeah. I feel like when I'm in a state where I don't feel grounded and I am not grounded enough to feel my emotions and I'm in like a wave of just kind of avoiding, right?
Right.
I'm much more likely to ruminate and just pace back and forth trying to like
Yeah.
cognitively figure it out when it never doesn't work,
I wonder what the correlation is there. Cause like if you could just feel it and you just like
Yeah.
think about that. Like I went through this stressful situation and I could
Yeah.
feel what happened and I felt like overwhelmed. I felt violated. I felt whatever it is.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd be able to like acknowledge the emotion and move on. But
Right.
if you can't feel it, you can't identify it. And so
Yeah.
your brain's like, well, that system doesn't work. Why
Yeah.
don't we just overthink it?
Absolutely. I think there 100% could be a correlation there.
I
It's
don't
very
know.
interesting to think about. It's so
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, rumination.
Yeah, that can lead to an appraisal.
Right. So again, if we're talking about cognitions, I think my partner's here. When we're talking about cognitions, right, that you're using your human part of your brain to come to a conclusion about whatever you're working through, right? If you're trying to go back and forth and really trying to work through what's going on, it's not hard to imagine that you're going to walk away from this experience coming away with a meaning or belief system attached to the traumatic experience. And that's the cognition. That's the appraisal we
That's the
talked about,
appraisal, yeah.
I think, in episode 1 or 2.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Because something like happens to you.
Yeah.
You're trying to make meaning, and it's like, oh, okay. So whereas before it felt like love was unconditional, I am worthy of love.
Yeah.
I can receive this and give this at any time. Something happens, you walk away, and you're like, love is conditional.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
It changes the way that you think about the world and
Yeah.
about situations that are within the world.
And that's what makes trauma so harmful and so damaging. It, like you said, fundamentally changes the way you look at the world, you behave in the world, you process the world. Right. So a lot of times the cognitions that come out of ruminating about, oh man, I should have done this after this trauma response, should have done that, it relates to a blame on yourself or something that puts the shift towards you should have done something different in order to have avoided that stressor. And that can be very damaging because you can then get to a point where you start invalidating your own emotions.
Yeah, it almost feels like ruminating solidifies your new appraisal.
Yep.
You know?
Yep, absolutely. So I guess what's next on that?
Intrusive thoughts we should touch on quick.
Right. So
because those are different than ruminating.
Yeah.
Go
What do
ahead.
you think about?
You do that.
So intrusive thoughts, I mean, they are what it says. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's like getting thoughts that are unwanted. They're thoughts that are like, something that they're ego dystonic. And if you don't know what ego dystonic means, it's something that's not in line with what your sense of ego, what your ego within yourself wants to do. Like, for example, if I'm trying to think of
kill myself, hurt myself,
right.
cut myself.
So like these are thoughts that you are consciously aware that are happening, but you actively don't want them.
Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, I'm feeling very suicidal. That's what we call ego dystonic. Now, if there was another thought, we say that you wanted to be suicidal and like this was in line with a plan, then we would call that ego syntonic. Right. So anyways, I guess I digress there. But yeah, intrusive thoughts are a major common symptom of PTSD because, when you are developing with a lack of sense of self and, as we mentioned earlier, trauma starts bleeding within your timeline, it kind of takes away the color within your life. You are more likely to kind of like have a sense of self that comes up with these thoughts, that intrudes your psyche with these thoughts that you're better off dead.
Yeah. And sometimes like we had an example of like explosions and stuff too.
Yeah.
Like almost like it's almost like a flashback.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where if maybe you're like a veteran or something like
Yeah.
that, and you have experienced war times, then the intrusive thoughts might be something related to like explosions or
absolutely.
something like
intrusive memories.
Intrusive
right?
memories. Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at.
I think, I mean, again, there is so much more to be discussed there. This could be an episode in and of itself, but I think it's safe to like kind of summarize that as in like, intrusive thoughts are a symptom of your body like presenting you with an alerting like image or an alarming image or an alarming memory or alarming cognition as a way to tell you, hey, there's a lot more pain here that's unprocessed. I need you to process this.
Yeah, one thing that I took note of because I thought it was fun was that intrusive thoughts are a sign of like low serotonin. So if serotonin drops to critical levels, you might have intrusive thoughts. Not to say that you will have intrusive thoughts or that if you have intrusive thoughts, it's because of your serotonin.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting little correlation that if your serotonin drops, you might have intrusive thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Rumination, we should talk about psychic determination.
Okay.
From our good old pal Freud.
Yeah. We have about, I would say, maybe 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, cool.
So I'll try to keep this quick, unless you want to take it.
You got it.
Psychic determinism is a concept that, Sigmund Freud, I guess, founded, whatever, came up with. And it involves like this concept that like no thought is random.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing that comes to your cognition is out of the blue. Everything is happening kind of for a reason. So like, for example, if you're driving down the street and you get like an intrusive, I guess, thought in that moment, like, oh, you randomly start thinking about all the times you got stressed out, all the times you got hurt, right? This is not a random thing that's happening. This is like your brain finally feeling that your body's regulated enough at this time to bring up the thing that it's been holding on to for a while for you to deal with.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's it could be then whenever you engage in that, like no thought is random, then you start to ruminate about it.
Yeah.
And the idea, like the hope with psychic determination is that your body is able to like process whatever it is that it decided it wanted to bring up. But the reality is that that sometimes you start to ruminate on those thoughts and your body will become like hyper aroused, and sometimes you'll fall back on maladaptive coping, or you'll need a coping skill, or maybe you even dissociate because you have got yourself so hyper aroused that it starts to shut down because you started like trying to fix this in your mind. I don't know, ruminating about it.
If you don't basically have like the proper skills to have dealt with, how to process your emotions, and you're undergoing like a psychic determinism type of moment, right? Like you're feeling regulated and your brain presents you with a painful memory. If you don't have the tools to process that how your body probably wants to, it'll be very easy to fall into rumination, like, oh, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Or it could be very easy to like shove the memory down and suppress it until another memory comes up, right?
Yeah.
And this leads to the concept of free association, right? Like that your brain and your body are trying to, this is also by Sigmund Freud, I believe, your brain and your body are trying to get to the end of, I wouldn't say end of thought, but end of like
the problem, maybe
the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's trying to lead you to where it's holding onto the problem so you can eventually like work its way out. And what I mean by that is like, if you kind of just sit there while you're in a regulated state and you just follow your thoughts, no matter how random. Like, say that you're thinking about the sky is blue, and I remember I was driving by under the blue sky. It was so beautiful, and I saw some birds. Oh, birds remind me of this memory when my mother was feeding the birds. Oh, I think about my mother. Oh, my mother played a very traumatic role in my life. Like, your brain will it'll navigate its way from a random thought and it'll bring you right to where you need to go, to bring your attention to something that needs to be resolved, right? And, this is something that they used to do in the old school days of therapy where you would just kind of sit there or lay there, I guess, and just randomly talk. And eventually the client's monologue will have them end up towards where it needs to go.
I have to believe that there's some validity in that.
I tried it once.
Even though Freud is a little nuts, and his theories are a little out there, I have to believe that is true, because if you sit with somebody who like like word vomits and over talks, like they
Yep.
just have to fill the voids. They say so many things that they probably don't mean to say, but if you just sit and listen to them ramble and like say all of these
they'll
things,
get to where their
like,
brain wants them to
"Ooh,
go.
I don't think you meant to tell me that,
Yeah,
but I have it.
It just goes to show the brain is constantly trying to heal. It's a self-healing machine. Your body's a self-healing machine, right?
Yeah.
It's constantly trying to find a way to bring into your awareness what it's holding on to.
Yeah.
And free association and psychic determinism are a form of that.
Yeah.
And I think they're very applicable, right? Like I can relate to, seeing that in session as a therapist.
Yeah.
While also seeing that within myself as I'm healing.
Absolutely.
Right? The more you heal, the more regulated you are, the more your body and your brain will feel comfortable to bring up what you've been suppressing.
Right. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Incorrect. False. Get out of here. Do you want to explain why that isn't true?
Okay, let me just say that even there's a dose response like kind of theory, right? So if you experience one event, it kind of softens you up and makes you more vulnerable to like whenever you experience trauma later, you're vulnerable to experience traumatization. So the more trauma that you experience, the more likely you are to get like store that in your body, become traumatized, have it be worse, experience all of these things. Really what it does whenever they're saying what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is if it almost does kill you, it'll turn off a lot of the feelings in your body. What's it called?
Analgesia.
Analgesia, where you can't feel things.
You
right?
can't feel pain.
Right, you can't feel pain. Yeah.
Right.
So it'll like turn those systems on. So it'll harden you in that sense. Like you won't be able to feel pain. You'll become like colder.
You'll on
numb.
the surface look like you're enduring a lot, but really you're not as in touch with your body. You're not being sensitive to it screaming at you, and that's why you're more likely to explode and reach boiling points so much more quicker.
Yeah, because you'll have all of these. You're like walking through a dream whenever you're super traumatized and you're not even in touch with anything. And then whenever something does kind of like spark something in you, it's so overwhelming because it's the only thing you can feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't feel those little patches here and there. It's like you feel it all or you don't feel any.
I remember our professor was talking about how like, he wonders like, some people will go through the same traumatic experiences, whether it's wartime or whatever, right? Some of them will come out with PTSD and some won't, right?
Right.
And he was mentioning, like, I wonder what it's like. Well, I wonder what their upbringing was like, right? It is more probable that the people who walk out with PTSD and who are more scarred from war have either, like we discussed before, they didn't have the tools to regulate and have process their emotions, and two, probably have a history of complex trauma, a history of blocking their sense of pain and blocking out their sense of emotions, right? And as you continue to go on, there's so much built up in your body that you have no idea that's going on. Like wartime or something big that's traumatic is going to just break you. Right? That's too much to put on the body. Whereas someone who might not walk out from a traumatic experience with PTSD might have really great caregiving, a really great social support system growing up, space that helped them regulate their emotions and modeled for them what it's like modeled a resilience reference point to show them what it's like to feel your emotions and process it out, to be able to do that for yourself. Right.
It's also notable too that some people are just born with a more sensitive stress response system.
Yeah, there's temperament. There's so much that goes into your biology. And as we discussed, people, like trauma is passed down through generations. It fundamentally changes your DNA. Right. There's epigenetics that play into it. So yes, like you might be ready to be like, you're ready to be fired up straight out of the womb. Right. All these cortisol receptors, like technically, if you're really thinking about it. Right. Or sorry, more likely to develop more cortisol systems. Yeah. Receptors, or rather.
So really, what doesn't kill you, if it makes you stronger, it's because you had a good social response, which is, I love the example of like somebody saying, wow, that was really bad. Let me help you. Let me give you some tools and resources so that if it ever happens again,
support,
you'll be able to make it through.
Absolutely.
Like that's the ideal response you want to have for somebody going through something traumatic, or if you go
Yep.
through something traumatic, you would want to have that response for yourself to avoid traumatization.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
On that note,
Wow. That's everything, isn't it?
yeah, that's everything.
Wow. That was a lot.
Yeah, it was.
What would you wrap this up with? What
Oh.
would you want the viewer to leave after hearing all that about dissociation? And
Oh, I just want you to always know it depends. I want you to think critically.
Yeah.
That it's never as easy as a
Yeah.
diagnosis. You don't follow the criteria and boom, you have it. It always depends on things that surround it.
What are some tools that people can use if they're struggling with dissociation?
Apparently not mindfulness. Did you hear that too?
I remember, yeah. Well,
yeah.
yes and no, right? It's like you can, right? However, like if you're dealing with a lot of complex trauma, mindfulness will bring your mind, like it'll become aware of all the trauma it's holding on to, and that could be more damaging. So you might want to hold off on becoming fully aware and coming fully online with what your body is like online.
Right.
Right? So like these are things you want to do bit by bit. And this is why we say in every episode, like, be careful trying to address your traumas alone without the supervision or the oversight of a mental health professional. You can inadvertently like just go ahead and re-traumatize yourself by accident, trying to uncover memories you're not ready to face yet.
Yeah. So I guess that like the biggest tool for dissociation would just be trying to bring a little bit of awareness.
Yeah, it's some grounding, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, try to see if you can figure out what triggered the dissociation to begin with, which is also tricky because the more you dissociate, the more things are going to start triggering you to dissociate. This is also something that we discussed in a different episode, where how like the more stressors you face and the more trauma you have tend to start connecting into it itself. Like if you go through a stressor a few months after an unprocessed PTSD moment, that stressor might kind of become one big blob within your psyche, within the trauma. And now the stressor is going to also create that traumatic response, right?
Right.
So the more your trauma goes unprocessed, the more likely you're going to be to just dissociate like randomly, right? When in reality, it is connected to something. So maybe like practicing, like being, you know, figuring out when you are dissociating, when you finally become aware you're doing that, doing something that lowers your heart rate, doing something that brings you back down into your body, a safe space, finding that is going to be probably important.
Oh yeah, finding your safe like people, probably, or space, or like something that you really enjoy doing. Like maybe if it's like coloring, like the movement of the pen back and forth is kind of it helps with trauma because it's like a bilateral. Yeah. So if you like can do that, it might bring you back to knowing where your safe places are. Yeah.
So watching our breaths, really just lowering our heart rate, doing different things. Everyone has their own little self-soothing and or self-care technique that really kind of brings you back down into your body, and really just practicing that while you're giving space for your body too. Like really just honoring whatever emotions it brings up, whatever pain it's feeling. Now, this isn't a definite response because, you know, like addressing dissociation to stop it isn't to stop the dissociation. It's to heal the trauma.
Yeah.
And that's something we're probably going to have to discuss in a different episode. But in the meantime, we can manage symptoms.
Yeah, that's the best we can do.
But there is hope, 100%.
There is hope. And I hope, I mean, I know it sounds doom and gloom and I don't want it to, but I hope that the takeaway is that we're able to heal and we're able to grow and we're able to bring some awareness to this so that we can
growth.
Like live a happier and better and actually like a more fulfilling life than you know you would have.
Because the idea is, right, like you're never going to walk away from a trauma. Like if your goal is like, I just want things to go back to how they were before the trauma event, unfortunately, like things will never be the same, right? But what will happen if you do the work and undergo the experience to like your journey to heal yourself, like your perspective will change and strengthen and turn into something even more beautiful than it was before.
Yep. I think that's a good way to end.
Yep. Well, this has been Traumadelic Therapy. My name is Omer.
I'm Becca.
Thank you so much for tuning in. And we are appreciative if you made it this far. If you have any questions, feel free to DM us. We'll be sure to hold more Q&A sessions when we have the chance. So DM us at Traumadelic Therapy on Instagram. That's TRAUMEL. Wait, no, hang on.
I was like, wait a second.
Sorry. At TRAUMALEDIC Traumadelic Therapy. My apologies. Clearly, I'm dissociating today. Thank you again for tuning in. You have a lovely day. Don't forget to wash your hands.
I was going to say that. Don't forget to wash your hands.
Peace.